But that's not all. Notice that Dr. Ehrman just assumes that the probability of the resurrection on our background knowledge is very low. But here I think he's confused. What, after all, is the resurrection hypothesis? It is the hypothesis that Jesus rose supernaturally from the dead. It is not the hypothesis that Jesus rose naturally from the dead. That Jesus rose naturally from the dead is fantastically improbable. But I see no reason whatsoever to think that it is improbable that God raised Jesus from the dead. In order to show that that hypothesis is improbable, you'd have to show that God's existence is improbable. But Dr. Ehrman says that the historian cannot say anything about God. Therefore, he cannot say that God's existence is improbable. But if he can't say that, neither can he say that the resurrection of Jesus is improbable. So Dr. Ehrman's position is literally self-refuting. But it gets even worse. There's another version of Dr. Ehrman's objection which is even more obviously fallacious than Ehrman's egregious error, and I call it Bart's blunder. Here it is. Since historians can establish only what probably happened in the past, they cannot show that miracles happened, since this would involve a contradiction, that the most improbable event is the most probable. In truth, there's no contradiction here at all, because we're talking about two different probabilities. The probability of the resurrection on the background knowledge and the evidence versus the probability of the resurrection on the background knowledge alone. And it's not at all surprising that the first may be very high, while the second might be very low. There's no contradiction at all. So in sum, Dr. Ehrman's fundamental objection against the resurrection hypothesis is demonstrably fallacious. Now, Hume had an excuse for his abject failure. The probability calculus hadn't yet been developed in his day. But today, New Testament theologians no longer have any excuse for using such demonstrably fallacious reasoning. Now, Dr. Ehrman has already shown himself to have the scholarly objectivity to reverse himself on the power of the empirical evidence. But in this case, a reversal of his position is mathematically obligatory. And I hope that the same scholarly objectivity that led him to reverse himself with respect to those four facts will now also lead him to rethink his opposition to the resurrection hypothesis. Now, in my few remaining minutes, let me return to that first contention and deal with Dr. Ehrman's responses there. He said that there are a sort of wish list that he would offer for historical sources, and that the Gospels are not as good as we would want. Well, let me simply say that this wish list is so idealistic as to be practically irrelevant to the work of the practicing historian. The only purpose that it serves is the psychological purpose of setting the bar so unrealistically high that the Gospels appear to fall short by comparison. In fact, however, no sources for ancient history measure up to this wish list. And the New Testament documents, I think, do fulfill 4 out of the 6 in his list unproblematically, and the other 2 partially. So the real question is, not are they as good as we would like, but are they good enough to establish those 4 facts? And they certainly are. What about all the inconsistencies? Well, remember I said you'd have to show 3 things to put this argument through. First, that they're irresolvable. Second, that they lie at the heart of the narrative rather than in the details, which in fact they do. And thirdly, you'd have to show that all of the documents are on equal claimed historical credibility, since inconsistencies in a later, less reliable source doesn't undermine an earlier, more credible source. So I don't think that really he's shown that these things, these inconsistencies, invalidate the narratives. In fact, when you look at them, the Gospels all agree that Jesus of Nazareth was crucified in Jerusalem by Roman authority during the Passover feast, having been arrested and convicted on charges of blasphemy by the Jewish Sanhedrin, and then slandered before the Roman governor Pilate on charges of treason. He died within several hours and was buried Friday afternoon by Joseph of Arimathea in a tomb, which was sealed with a stone. Certain women followers of Jesus, including Mary Magdalene, who is always named, having observed his interment, visited his tomb early on Sunday morning, only to find it empty. Thereafter, Jesus appeared alive from the dead to his disciples, including Peter, who then became proclaimers of the message of his resurrection. All four Gospels attest to all of those facts. More details could be added simply by including facts mentioned in 3 of the Gospels, 3 out of the 4. And as I say, the bottom line is that Dr. Ehrman himself admits now, since 2003, that despite the inconsistencies, these 4 facts are historical. In fact, N.T. Wright, at the end of his massive study of the resurrection narratives, states that the empty tomb and appearances have a historical probability which is so high as to be virtually certain, like the death of Augustus in AD 14 or the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. That is incredible. So I think that the debate really isn't over these facts. The question is the best explanation of the facts. And the objection that Professor Ehrman offers is not the objection of a historian. This is not a historical argument. This is a philosophical argument which is based upon a misunderstanding of the probabilities involved. Once that is cleared up, I see no reason at all why one cannot infer on the basis of the historical evidence that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead.